Hey there, and welcome back to an episode of the B2B Marketing Asia podcast. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo. Joining me is someone who I've been following for quite a while now on LinkedIn. He is an outreach and sales expert. He is Thibaut, who is the founder and CEO of SalesLab. Good to have you on the show, Thibaut.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe, for having me on the show. Really happy to be able to speak with you and your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that a lot to learn today, because today we'll be talking about three things that have been working really well for you or maybe some of your clients when it comes to sales and outreach. And then maybe one thing that hasn't worked out quite as like it was planned. So maybe we start with one of the things that is working for you or maybe some of your clients when it comes to outreach.
Sure. So I would say the main thing that is working really well for me and my clients and pretty much everyone I train and who's doing it is to have a prospecting routine. So for the history, I come from my first job in sales was selling airplane cleaning services to airplane owners. I was 15 years old and I went to the local airfield and I was just like basically doing cold prospecting, walking to owners and just talking with them to see if I could clean their airplanes. And I've been through my career doing these kind of things where I didn't rely on anyone else to generate inbound leads. No one knew about my brand or anything, but I basically saved myself by having a really clear and really healthy prospecting routine. What I mean by that is instead of having like big bursts of work when you're trying to generate pipeline and get opportunities in the pipe, you actually try to understand what is your target for a specific set time. So I don't know, it can be, if you want to make 1 million euro for a year, you have to divide that by every month and then understand what's the reply rate you get, what's the meeting rate, and how many people you need to contact every day or you need to add to your sequence every day. And when you have that, you take a big number, divide it in really small chunks, and then it becomes a lot more realistic. And if you can stick to having a routine where you contact these people, follow up, and just do the same every day, this is going to create like a simple, basically outbound engine. And for me, that has been the recipe of a lot of success I've seen with my customers, with running my business. And so that's the main thing I would say. One of the 3 points I would say is really important.
Yeah, I think that was a takeaway from me in following your post. You always talked about the routine that you set up. I think you set up like a certain time period every day you block out just to do that routine. I'm keen to hear what has been some of the biggest key learnings in terms of not giving everything away. What is your kind of routine consist of and what has worked in doing it? Is it like, we'll talk about some of the other things, but maybe some of the things on LinkedIn.
Sure. So the routine is really simple. What I do is when I come to the office and I don't have a podcast recording scheduled with you, typically the first thing I do is that I will open my Notion, which I use. It's a simple tool you can use. Typically, I use it to track my leads, but no one in sales does that. They use like Outreach, SalesLab, all these things. But I'll go and understand, just check all the people I need to follow up with. So I see, okay, last touch point I had with this person was 2 days ago. I'm going to go and say, okay, check on LinkedIn. Is this person replied or did they ignore my message? If they ignore, I'm going to follow up. And I just go through the whole list like that. While I'm doing this, actually before I just pour my coffee, and as I want to drink my coffee warm, I have a rule, which is if I didn't finish my follow-up, I don't touch my coffee. So as I actually, it's a life hack I have. I really like coffee. I really need coffee to be motivated or whatever. And so if I didn't get my coffee, it's hard. So I love my coffee warm. So what I do is I make sure I just blast through my follow-ups really quickly. So I'm done with this. And then once it's done, I start drinking a bit of my coffee and then I look for 5 new prospects. So I go on LinkedIn, I look for who checked my profile, who liked and engaged with comments and posts I did or other people's posts. And then basically I add them to my sequencer or to my Notion, and then I reach out to them and add them to my sequence. And once it's done, I'm done with my prospecting routine and I start over the morning after.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been following that routine for myself as well, too, because the consistency is really important. I'm curious when you talk about, is there any type of way to get like notifications? Because I'm trying to figure this as well out, too. Right now, it's a little bit manual where I have like Google Excel sheet and I have a bunch of contacts and things like that. But I guess I can set up filters in terms of when something is overdue. I can get like a notification, but I'm not sure if you've dealt with anything like that similarly.
So I started like with a Google Drive too, and it's not really the best. Then I was looking for an option to be able to keep track of my prospecting activities on LinkedIn. The only problem I found is that most cadencers and sequencers and stuff like that, they are email centric, meaning that you have to find an email to be able to create the lead. And if you're prospecting with LinkedIn or you don't have the email, you're going to put like a info ad something or whatever, but it's just a waste of time. And I think it's just a bit dumb. So what I've done, I've created like a prospecting tracker on Notion where it's URL centric. So it means that a LinkedIn URL or LinkedIn profile is what defines the unique ID of a lead. And basically I just go through that. I don't have a system to say, hey, this is overdue or not. I could actually create a formula, but I'm not that smart. So I made a very simple stuff. And the idea for me is every 2 business days, I do a follow-up. So I just look at the date and then check when was like if it's 2 days before or whatever, and that's it. I know there's some formulas you can play with, but I'm not the tech guru, so I can't tell you more about that.
No, I think that's some good advice as well, too, because I think we tend to overcomplicate a lot of things when it comes to structures and processes and like that. But sometimes just the simplest stuff works even better if you're able to do it on a consistent basis. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing what's working, number 1. Let's move on to what's working in the world of sales and outreach, number 2.
Sure. So now we can actually talk maybe a bit more about once you've actually had the meeting set or you're running your discovery call. So one thing that is working really well for me, and that goes really well with the first one, is to disqualify super early. And I really try to make sure that when I go in calls, I'm not like needy or whatever. The best way to do that is to have enough pipeline and a lot of opportunities so you can say no to people. And the good thing for me is that I'm just running my business myself. So I really like to refuse business I don't want to have. So the way I disqualify is very simple. I will either just tell to people like, I can't help with you because basically what you're asking, I just can't do. So a lot of people say, hey, can you just do some lead generation for us or prospect? And no way, I'm not doing this. Or if I'm going to go into a company and I just really don't want to work with this company, I'm going to double or triple the price. And that often is a really good way to disqualify because people don't actually have the money. But once it happened that I did it and they actually signed, that was a big deal. That was pretty cool. That was super annoying, but I made a ton of money doing it. So it was cool. So disqualifying early, making sure that when you sense there's not a fit, you actually just push back is a really good way to make sure the deals you're working with have energy. And so it's something I've learned from Skip Miller and proactive selling. And we're working together on that. Just making sure that you understand the problem, the person you're going after, and what are their problems and what's the size of the problem is super important. And if the problem is not there or it's too small, it's very good to just say, hey, no hard feelings, but let's not waste each other's time here. So that's really one thing I do.
Got it. So you talked about if it's something obviously you don't do or you don't want to do, you go ahead and disqualify it. And you talked about the size of the problem. Can you share more about that and how that comes into your disqualification criteria?
So basically, what I like to do when I run a discovery call or a first call is not to do a demo or whatever. I just ask people, okay, so tell me a bit more about this specific situation. So I'll ask them, so I maybe will prime them with the tool that we call the 30-second speech, where I'll say, people like you typically have these questions. What are your questions? And so people often, if they come to a call, they have a specific question. So they say, I don't know, we're trying to do some social selling or train people on LinkedIn. And so the thing is, training people on LinkedIn is really not like it's not a problem in search. It's more, hey, I know people should be on LinkedIn. I want to train them. So I'm like, why? Tell me more about your reply rate. Tell me more about your meeting rate. How many meetings you need to book? How many opportunities is that? What's the size of the pipeline? What's your win rate? And basically, at the end of it, they're like, okay, we need to reach, 200 meetings per month for the whole team. We're currently at 50. We have a 150 meeting problem. Multiply that by the basically average value of a meeting and what you get in pipeline, and you get a problem that is quantified. So that's really the idea of what I do in my calls. I really try to understand what is the problem. And once I have an idea, I try to look for a gap. So this is all proactive selling methodology here that we do. And in here, for me, it's really important to make sure we find the gap, look and hunt for gaps. Because when you have these gaps, you can actually help them bridge a bit of the gap and make a dent in the problem.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway for me was not only bridging the gap, but quantifying the issue as well, too. I know that's a little bit easier in sales because, as you said, it's very clear what your pipeline is, how many meetings you need to get, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a little bit more challenging. And for example, I work with a lot of marketers. And so marketers are not maybe as quantitative as, say, some of their sales counterparts. So, for example, a lot of companies reach out to me to help them with their company USP, which is something I do. But to your point, I haven't really quantified that or maybe gone deep enough to say, okay, what happens if you don't have a strong USP, for example? Like, how does that really impact the organization? Is it, I guess it goes back to, is it a nice to have or is it a must have? And maybe that's something that I could do better of just listening to this call, is asking people to decide whether or not it is a nice to have or a must have. Because if it's obviously nice to have, then it's not as strong in terms of they're willing to give you money versus a must have. So that's a good advice for me as well too.
But Joe, the thing is, the people you're talking to, who are they typically? Like, what's the job titles they have?
Very good question. So I think we originally get brought in by either marketing managers or marketing directors. And so both of those are looking at from two different perspectives. Marketing managers are generally the ones who are executing it. And then marketing directors are the ones who are generally overseeing, strategizing, and things like that. What they want is not necessarily, ideally it should be the same, but realistically their roles and responsibilities differ. So it's actually going to differ quite a lot.
And what's the metric they have? Let's say if you have a marketing manager or marketing director, I guess they are measured and evaluated by like a specific metric. So what is that?
Yeah, so for most of my clients, it's focused on net new pipeline contribution. So essentially, how much are they generating for the company based on their marketing efforts?
Okay, I see. Because this is really where you can look for the problem. Often the links that are going to be made between the USPs and the problem is something that they're going to have to make, and your job is to help them make this link. But typically you can have the conversation and say, okay, if we're having a conversation now, is because I guess you're trying to reach a specific target. So tell me more. What's the target? Where do you stand at this target? And based on that, you're like, okay, what do you feel like your USPs? If you were having the perfect USP that you want, where would you stand? On a scale of 1 to 10, it can be something like that. Just find a way to quantify that. And 1 to 10 is a good way to do it. If there's numbers, it's great. Basically getting this really clear, because these people are talking to you because they have the problem. And if they tell you, we're doing great, nothing there to do, it's a lead you should disqualify. And also, if you're talking to people and they don't want to actually show numbers or share numbers, you also know it's not really a deal you can go and help with, and just be honest about that. You're like, I know, we're having a conversation. You tell me you want to help with USPs, but I don't understand why. And you don't want to say, tell me why. So I'm sorry, I'm not working like that. And by being really honest like that, you can really test the energy of your deal, because it's very common to have what I call the U-shaped pipeline, where you have ton of opportunities in stage 1, ton in stage 5, late stage, and nothing in between. And basically this late stage are often really unqualified because we just have a big pipeline and we're super happy to have this big number. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I really like the advice of quantifying from 1 to 10, because the holy grail is, like I said, getting them to quantify their pipeline targets, things like that. But unless they're really very familiar with you, they won't disclose that. So obviously a client will disclose that, but if it's a prospect, they'll be very hesitant. But if I ask them, for example, how comfortable are you of doing it yourself, or how much of this is a pain for you to do, and they say, yeah, it's a 2 or 3 on our priority list right now, then, or how painful it is. And it's okay, probably not something that you need help with right now. Like, I'm happy to provide some resources, but it doesn't make sense for us to continue on a more commercial conversation just yet, until it's something that's obviously going to make more impact in your specific role. So I think it's really good advice as well too, that I hadn't thought about. I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So that's 2 down. One more. Yeah, I'll let you answer that one. And then I have a question on how we bridge the gap. So we talked about the routine. We talked about disqualification. I think a lot of people will try to figure out the middle part, but maybe I ask you another question off the back of that.
Sure. So I really think that has been working really well for me, and pretty much a lot of really people I've interviewed. I have a podcast also where I interview a lot of really successful salespeople. And it's just to have your own personality and not play a role basically when you're playing in sales. So I was interviewing Matia Schapper. Maybe you know of her. She's an SDR for SalesLab and founder of SDRs of Community. We were talking yesterday. She has, I don't know, 1.5 years of experience in sales. She's super young, but she's crushing it and she's really good. She has built a really good brand. And the way she's done is what she understood is that she just had to ditch all the corporate stuff, the jargons, all the things that we think we need to have to be professional. And she just started acting like she was. And when you bring your personality in sales, and if you are funny, if you are always obviously being respectful, but just if you're being yourself, people will really love this. And they really appreciate talking and doing business with you. So that's really one thing, is that we're not doing business like we used to before, where it was very codified and everything. especially in Europe, in the US, you can be direct. And she works for Germany, like the German market, and everyone's saying, oh, in Germany, people are more rigid and whatever. Yeah, these people, they're retired now. And if they are feeling like super pissed because you're reaching out to them in a very friendly manner, fine. You don't want to work with them anyway. So that's the thing is, if people are not happy with who you are in your personal life and you're just like using this style in the way you sell, it's fine. It's actually a good filter. It's basically an assault filter. So you make sure that you're talking with really the right people in here. So that's really what I would say. Make sure that you vibe with people and you work with people who vibe with who you are. So don't be afraid of just showing your personality. And obviously, if you're a prick, maybe just work on your personality or work on being better. Be respectful. You can just have your own style.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. For me, like I started when I was in high school writing sketch comedy, and I did that in college as well too. And so it's carried through in the content I create today. I always try to add a humor spin to it. But I think going back to your point about kind of cultural nuances, because I did some social selling for very German companies. Everyone was flown in from Germany. They were down in Singapore. And I had the same kind of thing. Even though I was born there, it's been many years since I've been back. And so I was thinking, okay, they're going to be very stuffy maybe, or not so comfortable, but I've never laughed so hard in my life in that training. They were hilarious. A very German sense of humor, but it was just one of my favorite trainings to date. And I think, it goes back to, like I said, them, I guess, liking my personality, because not everyone will like me. And I think that's okay. The thing that so maybe I share, just adding on to what you talked about, because I'm a kind of content creator first and I like creating humorous things, I've started experimenting with things like custom-made humorous GIFs and memes for people. And the responses I've gotten is incredible, like from very senior people saying, oh, I absolutely love this. It's the most creative thing I've gotten all day. And so I think there's a lot of merit to what you say. I think the challenge for me, because I do sales training as well too, is how do you, I think it's a realization I came in later, is there's no one way to train someone, if that makes sense. Because I think my style may not work for someone, obviously, who is a bit more, not stuffy, but a bit more serious in their tone. Like that obviously would not work for them because it goes against who they are. So how do you get that across in what you're doing? Because obviously you work with different salespeople and different markets and different personalities. How do you get that across in the training?
So basically in my training, what I do is, I'm not saying this is the truth, do as I say because I'm the best or whatever. I'm just saying this is my experience. This is the experience of my students. And these are styles of things you can do. So in the training that I do and the overall methodology I use, they are like funding like core concepts. And so I explain these core concepts, and then the way you execute is really up to you. So I give example of execution, playbooks and everything. And also I understand one thing is, when you're training a team of, 20 people, you're going to have 10% who are going to be like extremely excited about it, 10% who will give no shit about it and there's nothing you can do about it, and 80% in between that will go in one direction or the other based on how entertaining you are and engaging you are. So that's the thing is, in training, when you're doing live training and everything, for me, it's really about how good can I give, how good of a show can I give, how engaging can I be. And there's always, we have a thing when I do training for M3 Learning for proactive selling. We have a thing we say we don't talk about the dog. It's a personal story from Skip Miller, where he talked about a dog he had to buy and everything, and all the whole story. And so this thing is, I don't have a dog. I'm not a dog person. And if I was selling the story, that would be falling flat. So what I do, I always go in the call and I say, we do Zoom calls and I ask, who has a dog? And then there's always one person with a dog, and then they come and show around, and then they show the dog, and everyone's laughing and everything. So how good of a show are you able to make? And that's more like not so much of a sales tip, but more a training tip. And it's just, can you make people being engaged? And that's how I do it typically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in addition to sales training, I also professor at a couple universities. And so one thing I realized is the more you bring them into the conversation, the better they learn. Because I've been doing this for a few years now. When I first started, I want to say I'm guilty of having a ton of PowerPoint slides and be that kind of guy. But as I progress, it's become like maybe 10 slides max and like very conversational based on different scenarios and prompts. So yeah, great advice, I think, for those in the HR and kind of training space as well too.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'd love to hear what is one thing that hasn't been working, because I know you're experimenting with it, hasn't been working when it comes to your sales or outreach.
So what hasn't been working has been automation for me and a lot of people around also. So I'm not big on automation for sales. I'm great on, I love automation for plenty of other things. But in sales, I think it's just a big problem we have is we have tons of sales enablement tools, and people think that the tool will make them great and that they don't need to know to learn how to use the tool. So if you've ever been to a product training session for a company that is on a SalesLoft or Outreach or whatever, it's trained by some very uninspired person who are just like product experts, and then they tell you, okay, so this is how you do a cadence and this is how you do whatever it is, which are just completely boring. And so the problem that I see is that automation is just taking out the human in the interaction. So what is you have the same emails, the same patterns, and to actually get replies and book meetings, you need to break patterns, and automation doesn't allow that. So for me, I think automation is great to make sure you have a repetitive task that are taken care of. But I always like to compare it to if you were basically put now into a Formula One, I don't know, like a Red Bull or a Ferrari Formula One, which are at the top of the chart, you would crash it going out of the pit lane. And that's the best tool ever. It just has all the data you need. There's 1 million telemetry points per second that are transmitted. It's just the top of the top. But if you don't know how to drive the car, you're going to crash it. So that's the same with automation. It just creates a huge leverage of terrible prospecting approach. And so for me, that's something that I've seen not working. I personally tried it a few times, never worked. So that's what has been failing there.
I'm really glad you brought that up because this is something I hear quite a lot about. Because obviously marketers are trying to reach people at scale. And so they think, and I was having this conversation just a couple of days ago. I made the exact same comment that, look, if you're going after B2B and kind of enterprise, things like that, it makes sense to personalize it because you wouldn't send the same message you would a CMO to, say, a manager or an intern or different companies. Like it just doesn't make sense. And I actually did it with my students. I had a prompt that I got was like, which templated. And they're like, it doesn't feel genuine to me. As a result, I wouldn't reply to it. And I think that is the problem with a lot of automated messaging and things like that is it just doesn't really cut through the clutter. Like you said, it's exactly cookie cutter. And that's what we should be moving against. So I'm glad you brought that up. I want to hear your thoughts about maybe two different things. One of which is enterprise sales, because that's obviously a little bit different than selling mid-market or kind of lower the funnel. So maybe we talk about some of the things that are working on enterprise sale and maybe how it differs from selling mid-market items.
Yeah. So when it comes to prospecting, enterprise sales is often a lot more intentional, where instead of trying to find leads and prospects based on their activity on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, you're going to have a list of accounts you have to go after. So the approach you have to have there is a bit different, where you're going to have to build this list of accounts. And then based on this list of accounts, you're going to have to find people who are interested in there. And your role is more to be an inspector than someone who's prospecting. So you're trying to gather data, collect understanding of things. And so the strategies you're going to use are going to be a bit different, where you're going to use a lot more channels, a lot more touch points, contact a lot more people in the same organizations. And there's a bunch of plays you can use for that. One that I really like is the play that I call the round table. Because one thing that is really interesting is like leaders in all organizations, we call them above the line buyers or ATLs, often really like to understand what are the other people like them working on. And so if you can get a roundtable where you invite people over to come do a quick pre-survey, come for 45 minutes online and do an interview where you just go through the results of the survey and get them to talk, they're going to really love that. And if you can do that with your target accounts, it's going to work really well in most cases. So that's something I really recommend, is just make sure that you are working really with this specific list of accounts, and you have different layers. So you can go really like above the line, below the line, we call that, and try and reach out to many different types of people. So that's really the main difference I can see.
That makes perfect sense. What would below the line mean in this scenario?
If we take your example, you're talking to director of marketing and marketing managers. Above the line, and I would debate here because directors is actually a job title which is not that great to make decisions on big problems. But in your specification would be below the line would be marketing managers, and directors would be above the line.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Last question I want to ask you around is technology. And we talked about automation, obviously not being one that you're favorable for, but I know that at least one that I found from you was Tolstoy. I'm hopefully pronouncing that correctly, and I can maybe provide a link to that. But are there any other specific technologies that you found have made the process easier? We talked about Notion. Anything else that you use in terms of your tech stack that has been helpful for you?
So in terms of sales, you basically gave the two tools I use, Notion and Tolstoy. So Tolstoy is great for video prospecting. Notion is great for organizing your thoughts and creating checklists and whatever. Again, Notion is something that is great for solopreneurs and creators. It's not super great for salespeople. It does the job, but it's hardly integrated with anything. So it integrates really well, but you have tools that are working really well for that. But for me, that's basically these two tools. I actually started using something called Vido, I think, or a meme, something to generate memes. LeadJet is actually pretty cool also, where you're able to extract data from LinkedIn and push it into your CRM. So these are the kind of tools that I like using. But the biggest one is Tolstoy, where for video prospecting, I use it every day.
Got it. And can I ask about how you use Tolstoy, if that's the most effective one you use?
Sure. So basically, I use it for sending simply like prospecting videos to prospects. I have a specific script where I try to basically say why I'm reaching out, asking a problem question, tease a resource, and then having a call to action. And it's just I record the video. It's 15 seconds, and that's typically how I use it. Then I have a link that I paste into LinkedIn, and then they can see the video, and then they can reply or go through different paths if I want to create like multiple paths for the video.
Awesome. And is that one video you send, or do you create like multiple 50-second videos depending on the person?
I create personalized videos. It's always 15 seconds personalized video. And yeah, that's one video per person. And it's not something that I scale for everyone.
Yeah. No, that's cool. The other one I was going to ask you, because I saw a video recently, it's been popping up all over my LinkedIn profile, particularly the sales folks in Europe. Have you found that helpful? Like, I haven't experimented with it yet, but keen to hear your thoughts.
I've seen the demo and everything, talked with the founder, didn't experiment it yet. So I can't tell you much about it, but I've seen a lot of people having good success with it. So curious to know on that.
Awesome. And the last one you said, was it SalesLab? LeadJet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this one is also really great to just like push data from LinkedIn inside of your CRM, and you can play with it inside LinkedIn. So it creates like buttons and everything. So you work within LinkedIn and you don't need to change basically pages.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thibaut, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all your insights. I was definitely taking some mental notes during, and I'm sure the folks watching, listening will as well too.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Joe. That was a really cool conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Guys, thank you so much for watching, listening to today's episode. Some super practical tips in there. So you've got to share this with all your friends, your colleagues. I'm sure they'll love it. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.